So over the weekend I played through Rise of the Tomb Raider. Not terrible, but not particularly good. 6 out of 10, maybe a 5. I don't think a 7. Game itself, okay when you're doing the good stuff, and the good stuff is some of the tomb puzzles are actually kind of fun, kind of neat. There's a lot of good visuals. This is high polish, as you'd expect. Combat is fun. People who complain about how you shoot too many people need to shut up, because honestly, it's the most competently done thing in those games. As far as, the last two, obviously the earlier ones were better in other areas. Of course, now they've dumbed down a lot of those. Holy shit, why can't your jumping be affected by momentum anymore? You know what, I have a theory on why it's so shooter heavy. Here's the thing, I don't think people have ever been massive fans of Tomb Raider. Not saying there weren't fans, but I think Lara Croft's image and all the marketing pushed it more than the actual games. Not that those games are bad by any means, I just mean I think more people know of Tomb Raider than play Tomb Raider, which, to be fair, isn't untrue of a ton of other games, but I think it's more true of Tomb Raider than the majority of them. I think more people play, say, I don't know what's the overly iconic fan, Mario. I think more people have played Mario in comparison to the amount who just know about it than, say, Tomb Raider versus people who just know Tomb Raider. Um, and obviously they want it to appeal to a lot of people, so I think that's why the platforming and puzzling has been significantly dumbed down. And yeah, I mean, platforming, it's basically dumbed down to the ridiculous point, to the point where, I don't know, Land Before Time, Jungle Adventure probably has more complex platforming than this does. But that's not the main issue here. The main issue is filler. When it comes to the puzzles, obviously most of them are now optional. And why is combat the focus? Because let's face it, it's easier to use difficulty selects for combat, which is probably why a lot of the game is now shooting people, which doesn't matter because the shooting is still the most competently executed thing in these newer ones, although once again the puzzles aren't bad and the platforming shit. When it comes to the actual game though, when you're not shooting, a lot of the time is just spent scavenging like Bioshock. Lots of people have compared it to Ubisoft games, and I don't think it's anywhere near that bad. It's more it's more like the Bioshocks where you've got sort of levels rather than massive open maps, but fairly open levels where the main threat is just going to be enemies, many of which disappear once you've beaten the stage, so just go back and scavenge for everything you missed. One of the main issues though is that, like Bioshock, there's a lot of story, and the story is flat out not very good. In fact, it's worse than not just any of the Bioshock games. I mean, I didn't like Infinite at all, but Infinite kept me sort of interested, even if I wasn't happy with the end results. This is one of the least interesting narratives in just anything. It suffers because there's a ton of backstory and lore, but there's basically zero as far as interesting characters goes. Lara Croft, it may well be one of the most boring protagonists outside of non-voice, non-entry, non-sort of nothing protagonists. She's, it just suffers from, that Plinkett thing from the Plinkett reviews where he says, let's judge a character based on how much you can talk about them without mentioning what they do in the story or what they look like or what their job is, etc. I think outside of maybe one villain, everyone in this fails that miserably, worse than anything in the Star Wars prequels, I'll tell you that. Um, and much like Bioshock, you're picking up loads of notes and spending a lot of time just scavenging for shit. Problem is, these notes, you can't listen to them without going to a separate screen and just listening to them. You can't have them playing in the background, which would help a lot when you're scavenging, because you wouldn't have to stop and just listen. You could listen to this stuff in the background, and that might tempt you to replay them and listen more, because there's a ton of lore here. I mean, every optional tomb usually has a couple of audio diaries to tell you about it. Like I said, it does suffer because none of it's really all that interesting, but at least it would have been better had you been able to listen to them while you were, I don't know, shooting rabbits. Speaking of which, crafting needs to go. It's boring and it's pointless. you're just going to be killing animals and searching for junk, since a lot of the stuff you're going to be picking up isn't tough to find. You just look on your map and go to it. Once this is a Ubisoft issue, admittedly, so I can see the comparison there. Problem is, too much of it is just a case of taking up your time, running back and forward, picking stuff up, and that sucks. I don't remember the previous Tomb Raider having as much crafting. I think it's part of this survival thing they try and pretend they're doing, which, they've never done outside of a DLC minigame you can get in this game, which ain't bad. Actually, the DLC, despite being horribly overpriced, if you can get it cheap, like I did, due to sales or whatever, I didn't pirate it, just saying. No, I really didn't. That's not like me making a joke. I actually did pay money for this. Those aren't actually bad. They're kind of more interesting than some of the stuff in the main game. Ultimately, there's just too much filler. It's too boring in places. And the best parts are just shooting people, which isn't that bad. It's just weirdly, for all the complaints about how these games are too much like shooters, they really should have more shooting, because that feels like the most developed thing. Like I said, I believe that's probably because you can easily modify difficulty up and down for the difficulty select, whereas puzzles and platforming are a lot harder to radically change based on a difficulty slider, and they might have more issues with people just getting stuck. Shooting's fun though. You get like a nice mix of weapons rather than having two you switch between and pick up and throw away. You've got four consistent ones, all with multiple modes and upgrades. Crafting, like I said, is kind of annoying, but wow, you get some fun stuff like poison. You can turn enemies against each other with a certain weapon. Yeah, it's generic, but it's all pretty satisfying. Finishers, guys die quickly. Play it on the hardest setting. The game's a complete cakewalk, even on the absolute hardest. So, would I recommend it? Sort of. It's like one of these things where you should probably go in and just avoid picking up all the crap. Just try and play straight through the main campaign. And if for some reason you like the story, I don't get why you would. Maybe you just love expanded universe and lore stuff and just get off on collecting optional bits of paper detailing stuff which has nothing to do with anything. Like I said, the story, Rhianna Pratchett, I actually thought her Heavenly Sword script was fantastic. I think that's one of the best action game scripts there is, as far as those DMC-esque titles go. Game itself not great. With this, it just lacks personality. It's just so lacking in character everywhere, aside from the artwork. It's easy to just go after cliches like the villain who gets shot before telling you the important thing and stuff like that, but I feel the real issue is just that it's boring, and that's an issue with a lot of the game as a whole. So, you know what? You avoid the bad stuff. It's not a bad title. It's high presentation, and there's some fun shooting guys, and if you like looking at pretty stuff and blowing shit up, it's not bad.